Hello again and welcome to the History Show here on Destination Uri. Today we're joined by a former resident of River Street in Uri, Willie Kelly. And Willie's going to talk to us about life in the River Street area, Kilmurray Street, where he grew up in the period from the 1940s through to the present day. So Willie, you're very, very welcome.
Thank you very much, James.
You're very welcome. And as I say, a River Street man.
Through and through.
But
Yeah.
like a lot of the landscape in Uri today, unrecognisable from the area that you grew up in.
Very much so. Very much so. Yeah.
And what are your feelings today when you go back?
It's just a whole new place. So it's just not where I was. All the houses, there's a tiled place there now, and all the old houses are all nearly gone on the top of the street there, all away. Where the Murphys, the fowl dealers, lived. At the Casey's was the publicans on the top of the street. Then we had Murphy's, the fowl dealers. Then we had Q O'Hare, the bookie. And then we had the trainers. And we had the Nuke, Mr. and Mrs. Irvin. And we had the Heaney's, which Sean and their brother, they were very intellectual people. Then we had the Quinns and the Tumildys, ourselves in number 7, and Mrs. Cully. And then we went on down to John Bennett used to keep the cows there. They used to milk the cows next door to us, the gateway. And then you had the Scouts Hall. And then you had McGuinness's, Mrs. Mary Dean. You had the Murphys. You had the Marns. You had the Smiths. You had the Campbells, the McAvoys. And an old lady there, Mrs. Martin, used to be a teacher apparently way back. And that was our street.
Now, you mentioned McGuinness's.
Yes.
And a lot of people will remember the late Barney.
Very much so, a character.
And Barney was a character.
A real character in Uri, yeah. Barney was something else, yeah. Yeah, Barney and I went to school together. Barney was a joiner.
Right.
Barney was a very clever boy, very clever boy.
And where did you get your schooling, Willie? At the Abbey Primary?
I went to the Abbey Primary and then went on into the secondary school. And then I was due to sit on the junior certificate. And the day before, I decided it wasn't for me. So I just opted out. And that was my mother. My mother just, I remember her telling me at the time, you know, I said, it's just not for me, Ma. That's just it. So I just opted out. And I went to be a message boy in Q Curtis's in the market.
In the butcher shop?
In the butcher shop. And I was there for nearly a year. So I was 7 and 6pence a week.
Now, you mentioned your mother. Mother was Bridget.
Bridget Gorman.
Bridget Gorman.
Yeah.
And she was married to your father, Robert Kelly.
That's right, yeah.
And your late brother, you had a brother named Robert after him.
That's right, Robert, yes. And Raymond, Rebecca, Rose, Mary and myself. 6 of us in a wee small house in River Street.
3 boys and 3 girls.
That's right, yeah.
Now, your mother originally was Bridget O'Gorman.
Yeah, from Cornmarket. And she had, her brothers, she had Curie, James, Oney, Pat, Tommy, and Willie. And Rose. That was in 19 Cornmarket, which we used to visit 3 or 4 nights a week.
Now, sadly, Willie, your father passed away prematurely through ill health.
Yes.
At
a very early age.
At an early age of 37.
Yes.
Leaving Bridget with a young family of 6.
Yes.
Now, your eldest brother was Raymond.
Yeah.
He was the eldest of the family,
Yeah.
isn't that right?
That's right, yeah.
And it would appear that Raymond assumed the role or saw his role as being the
breadwinner.
breadwinner
Yeah,
and
exactly.
stepping into
Yeah,
his dad's shoes.
very much so. Yeah, yeah.
So, Raymond, I take it, left school at an early age.
Well, Raymond attempted to go to sea at just over 13 years of age, and was letting on that he was a bit older to get onto the boats. And apparently, Dean would have been more up to date with this, because of the boat thing. But he went away with. He went away on the. I don't know which boat he went on, but he went away there, and then my mother told the head people in Fishers that he wasn't the correct age. So then he had to come home again. But knowing Raymond, a year later, Raymond got away again.
I remember reading on his discharge book that his first ship was the Rowan in 1942,
Right.
and Mickey Fern, whom you know well, and
Yes, Mickey,
Mickey
Fern.
is alive and well.
Yeah.
God love him. 90 years of age now.
Marvellous
He
man.
was 90 last month.
Marvellous man. Big Sea Fern family.
And Mickey well remembers, he was mate on the Rowan at the time, and he well remembers young Raymond as coming aboard as a seaman.
Yeah.
And he spoke about his enthusiasm, and you know, he was a very willing lad.
He loved the sea. Raymond loved the sea.
Now, tragically, Raymond was to lose his life a year short of his 19th birthday.
Yes.
And it's well documented that he was awarded the George Cross for his endeavours rescuing people from a stricken ship. But before we get to there, when you were growing up, when Raymond had left, what was life like in the Kelly household then?
Well, they always talk about life was tough and times and whatnot. All I know is that when you get up in the morning and went to school, you come home at dinner time, because I just lived just down from the Abbey. Mother was always there for dinner. You come home at 3:30 in the day, Mother was always there. Came to tea time, Mother was always there. In the evening, 8 o'clock, she took all of us by the hand, and we went down Murray Street, over to Corn Market, sat there to 10, a quarter past 10:30 at night, and home again. My mother was the epitome of an Irish mother. I couldn't speak highly enough of my mother.
That was your security, your stability.
That's where I was brought up and reared. And I could tell you one thing: you knew if you talked out of school, or if some neighbour asked you to do a message and you didn't do it, you knew you had your mother to answer to.
Now, Willie, you've just told us there. You spoke earlier, and recalled the neighbours who lived in the area.
Yeah.
And you know, I gather from what you said earlier on, there wasn't a lot. There wasn't a lot in amongst the community, but there seems to have been a great community spirit,
Yes, James.
camaraderie,
Yes.
sharing, people looking out for each other.
Right down that whole street. Right down that whole street. And if one was short, sugar, butter, a half a crown, there was no problem to go to any door. None whatsoever. There was a camaraderie there in that street, and that was absolutely fantastic.
Now, you were just a stone's throw from the port.
Yes,
And
we just looked over the river, and that's where the MV Dundalk and the Inishowen, the Inniscarra, that was the two boats that used to come there. And on down to the left was Lockingtons.
That's right.
And I remember then there was going back to the jobs. It used to, at 7 o'clock in the morning, the men used to stand outside, just outside the quay there at your entrance to the quay, looking for work. And the stevedore then, the head person then, was a man called Lavery. He would decide who got work on the day and who didn't. And you could have stood there from 7 to 9:30, and then told you weren't no work for you. And Raymond was there, Robert was there, all my uncles were there at some stage or other, and that meant that you got they called it the steam packet, the Irish, the MV Dundalk. That's where the jobs were.
The B&I.
Yeah, where you took off sugar, cement, timber, everything like that. And that was the saviour to keep the house going. You needed, they called it a score, and you needed that score to keep the house going. And that was one of our ways of living at that time.
So the port was very important to the local economy.
Very important, very, very important. All the dockers they all come from around that area. They all come from that. The Jennings is in Chapel Street. Butler Feenan. We knew all the old dockers. You know, they all come from Rooney's Terrace, Thomas Street, High Street, the Ruddies. They all come from there.
Now the port and the workers, as I say, obviously they were key to the local economy, to the local businesses, and there was a plethora of pubs in the area, right from Annie Dowdall's at Abbey Yard to
Tommy Casey's on the corner,
Murders and Bridge Street.
Dan Dowdall's, Murders, Only Hollywood on the corner. Those was and then you went on down to the McGill's and Mrs. McLogan. Then they were the latest ones. They had the pub on the corner there. Mm-hmm. So that's where the dockers would all have a drink, and when they would finish it, say start in the morning at 5:30, 6 o'clock, it was 11 o'clock, time for a sandwich and a pint. And then you'd finish at 2:30 or 3, and time for a pint again before they go home.
And there's many pictures of the coal dockers,
yes,
with the shovels,
yeah,
outside the pub.
Well, to lift one of those shovels, you'd know all about it.
That was it. That was a job.
That was amazing, because I used to watch, been brought up round the docks, and I used to. Our Raymond at the time was very fond of the pigeons. See, Raymond would. You could snare them over at the MV Dundalk to be there for the corn and that, you know, and he'd sell them an odd one when he'd get it, or even under the bridge in Dundalk, in top of River Street, where the railway, in under there, the pigeons used to rest, and that was where the river was flowing, and he'd slip down and go along the wall and try and catch them in their nests. Raymond, that was Raymond. So I used to do the same, not on the river, but at the steam packet and that, you'd always get the boats, you know. And then down in the docks, I used to watch them digging the coal boats. That was something else. That was absolutely the amount of coal. There was 4 buckets and 2 men in each bucket, and the amount of coal that went into those buckets, and the size of them, and the shovel. It was horrendous. And each man, they worked in pairs, and you had to have your bucket filled to go for the next fella, and he had to do the same, because if you weren't good enough, then you didn't.
That's right.
That's what it was. That's how good you had to be good.
Yeah.
You had to be good at your job.
There was no slacking.
No slacking. No. There was no slacking. And then they used to leave that boat and go for a score, and that evening at 5 o'clock, carry sugar, cement, on up to 8 or 9 o'clock that night. They were wonderful. They were wonderful men.
It would make you wonder, Willie, seriously, how did men do it?
And then they used to come home. Tom Tummelty lived next door to us. Tom was one of the dockers. And Tom used to come home, and we had no bathroom, none of that. So you went out the back at the cold water tap. And Tom used to go out there at 5:30 or 6 o'clock and wash himself thoroughly. And you imagine what cold would be on that. And that was every day out in the backyard. No such thing as a bathroom or anything. We hadn't got that.
Yeah.
It was all outside washing. So that would give you an idea.
And then you had the gasworks
We had
in
the
close
gas-
proximity.
Yeah, yeah. You know, funny thing, I heard one night we were talking something about I always think of the old song, the old lamplighter. Well, Hughie Grant was the lamplighter then in the gasworks. That's his boys were reared in Boat Street. So Hughie used to come round at night and light the lamps, and then about 6:30 or 7 the next morning come out and put them out. And that was the old lamplighter of long, long time ago. That was Hugh Grant.
I think it was around 1952 electrification came into Newry.
Well, that was, I remember that it was just like something to go back to London, to the old times, you know.
Yeah.
He used to come, and he was the lamplighter.
And then, of course, you mentioned the railway station.
The railway station at the
Dublin Bridge.
Oh yes, and then the bank holidays, the general holidays, the train was packed to capacity. There was just everybody was hanging out through the windows, getting a trip down to Warrenpoint. And many a time we had no money, but we got on the train. And everybody was rushing in Warrenpoint to get through the gates. Paddy Burke was the conductor. And you used to have to wait to Paddy, because if Paddy got an eye on you, he knew. And then it was walk back to Newry. So that was another thing. Marvellous. Well, marvellous. The railway was a disaster to have done away with. When you think of it, all the things that come from the ports and all went through Newry to Portadown to, you know, and that was all done away with.
And then, of course, we also, Willie, had the export of the livestock.
Oh,
and the holding pens at Dublin Bridge.
That Dublin Bridge, and that was actually Dean, my brother Robert. He did quite a bit of. He used to say all the cattle would go through the MV Dundalk, and then he said then you'd have to wash down when they get there, and wash the place completely. You can imagine with, I don't know, 100, 200 cattle, and then you come back to Newry, and next morning cattle back on again, and that went on for twice a week, the cattle in Dundalk. Now, actually, we finished up, a great friend of Raymond's was Peter Keenan of Boat Street, who finished up being a skipper
with
of the
B&I.
MV Dundalk. And another great friend of Raymond's was Desi Keenan, who you would be very closely attached to. Desi was skipper too. So that was two Newry men, finished up captains. So that'll give you an idea of the seamen round our area. You know, there was a lot of people went to sea there.
Well, if we move on to 1947, it's remembered locally as been a very hard winter. 1947 was particularly bad, but it was also a very bad year for the Kelly family, in that your mother lost her eldest child, and the family lost their brother.
Yeah.
And tell us briefly, Willie, what happened to Raymond.
Well, Raymond actually had gone out to somewhere in Rio, not Rio de Janeiro, but down around there, and they were due home 2 or 3 weeks before this happened. And unfortunately, their ship took fire somewhere on the way back, and they had to put back into Rio de Janeiro to get the ship shape again to head for home. And that, unfortunately, for Raymond, was a disaster for us, because when they came back, they were coming through the Bay of Biscay, Now, I don't know, people talk about the bay sailors that have been there. In January, February and March, the bay is a very dangerous place. Very dangerous place.
Notorious reputation.
Notorious. It has claimed a lot. So when they were coming through, they got an SOS from a ship that was called the SS Famagusta, which was going out to set a new life for the people. Now, there was 3 or 4 very, very wealthy men, and they were going to set a new life in Cyprus. And unfortunately, they got into trouble in the bay, and they had SOS, and the Empire Plover just happened to be the boat that was nearby. And the Famagusta, they put a lifeboat out with the people aboard, and lo and behold, the waves were 14 foot high. I'm only saying to what we got in the old Daily Express. The captain says,
there was 10 people in the lifeboat.
Yes.
And it overturned.
So Raymond, obviously they've been watching this on the ship, and his first instinct was to save life. That was natural. That was natural to Raymond. That nothing else. That's how we. That was the way we were brought up. That was it. So Raymond went straight into the water, and apparently the ships must have been close to one another, because the fella called Mr. Pappernell, he was the chief engineer, because I think he was injured when they got him aboard, but Raymond got him first and swam back to the ship, and they took him aboard and got him. Raymond then proceeded to go back in again. Now you must remember, those waves and the perilous seas didn't cost Raymond a thought. He went back in again, and he took out one of the directors, a man called Robinson, and he took him back to the ship and got him on board. And then he went again, and the lady, he had got, I think there was difficulties with her, and the waves were that high, I suppose Raymond was exhausted. So the waves eventually took him and buried him in the Bay of Biscay. I have no doubt, James, had he got her aboard, he would have been back in that water.
An absolutely incredible story, Willie.
Yeah.
It's like, it's something straight off the pages of a boy's comic.
Yeah.
And indeed, Raymond's story did feature.
Yeah, that's correct. Yes, in one of those comics. Yeah, it did indeed. Yeah, yeah.
But his bravery is just incalculable.
Yes.
To go in the first time was a major feat of courage.
Yeah.
But to repeat that on 2 further occasions is just, it's just unreal.
But you see, that was natural for Raymond. That was a natural thing for him to do.
It came from the
Life. There was life.
the share and
Yes. That's the community he come from.
the ethos of
yes,
the community,
exactly.
and the way his mother had reared him.
That's it. And it was someone in trouble. They needed help.
And he didn't even think.
There was no attachment to his life whatsoever. There was someone in that water had to get out, and he decided there wasn't.
He was the man to do it.
He was the man to do it. Yeah, he was 6'2". He was a powerful swimmer. He was a powerful swimmer. He used to swim out in County. They used to call it the County out the Belfast Road.
Mm-hmm.
That's where he swam there. You know, he was a great swimmer. Great swimmer.
And Willie, do you remember how the news impacted on the family?
Horrendous. I was coming from school, just down past Casey's, and there was a commotion. I heard the commotion, so I come off the footpath and come out into the middle of the road, and my mother was struggling with women, and mother always had an apron. She always wore an apron. Them days, you know, when you talk now about people being 70 and 80 now, the people were old then at 50 and 55,
yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So what happened was the telegram boy gave my mother the telegram, who was expecting Raymond home on the Saturday. This was a few days earlier. And my mother opened the telegram, which we have today. Regret to say son lost at sea.
Oh, Lord.
Writer, report later. So she tried to drown herself in the
Across the road.
Yeah.
And doubtless, I've no doubt that the poor woman, she never recovered from that.
To the day she died, when I go out to the Meta, when I lived with my mother till I was married, and till she lived 85, she lived 87, she would see her crying in the corner at night. She never, ever got over Raymond.
Well, you must feel very proud, Willie.
They were wonderful people, but it never sank in. You know, it was par for the course, or whatever the case may be. But now, thankfully to you, James, that this has all really come about after this number of years. You know, it's you're bringing it all back to me now. You know.
Yeah. And how do you feel about the fact that that your brother Raymond will be remembered in his hometown, literally where he was raised?
I feel a tremendous sense of, I just can't explain that. I mean, Raymond's going to be remembered in the next 100, 200 years.
Something I'd just like to ask you, Willie, before we finish. Sadly, Raymond's body was never recovered.
No.
So you never, as a family, you never got a chance to mourn for him, or
No.
or there was no grieving process.
No.
Would you feel, in a way, this will, for you and your sister Rose, you're the only two members of the family left, will it bring a sense of closure in some way?
Well, I suppose, yes, James, the fact now that you're getting the blue plaques and all that, the only one that really, my mother could never, ever, because she bore Raymond, and Raymond was our life. So by never getting his body, you can imagine how she felt.
Oh. And sadly, poor Dean isn't.
Oh, well, that's the
here,
sad thing about it. Because
but I'm sure Willie, like the rest of the family and the old neighbours that we spoke about, they'll all be there in spirit.
Well, that's the most important thing. I was talking to one of the Tumbledies girls leaving Mass the other morning, so I said to her, I want all the neighbours there because they're all part of us and they were part of our history. So I would want them all to be there and shake hands with them all the old, what's left of us all, you know. So definitely looking forward to that, you know, really am.
So it'll be really reinventing the community again.
Exactly. Just go back to all our old stock. Brilliant,
Well, it's
James,
great.
yeah.
It's great to see it, Willie. It's been great to speak to you.
It's been a pleasure to speak to you, James.
And
really has.
thanks very much
Yeah.
for coming in to see us today.
And thank you very much for bringing all this to fruition, because without you, I think it still would have been.
Well, the main thing is the man that we're talking about is going to get recognition that is long overdue and fully and well deserved.
That's
Willie Kelly, thank you very much.
James McAreavy, thank you very much. Thank you.